How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tesvav, Daf 15 of Masechta Shevuos. Friends, your friends, Oki. We are going to start on Daf Yud Daled Amud Beis, 2 lines for the bottom. From the bottom, we're going to talk about some stuff. Okay. Echra nichnas la'azore v'chulei. Okay, what is this talking about? I don't know. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, why not? All right. Okay. So, so the Mishnah had said, what had the Mishnah said? The Mishnah had said about 5 lines from the bottom of Yudalad Amud Aleph, she'emosifan ala ir v'ala azaris. We don't add on to Jerusalem or the azaras of the Beis Hamikdash. Ela b'melech, with the king, u'v'navi, with the prophet, v'urim v'tumim, the urim v'tumim that the Kohen Gadol had. V'sanedrin shoshim v'echad, the big sanedrin, u'v'shtei todas, and 2 todas that we're going to learn about today. U'v'shir, u'veis din mahalchin, and Bezdin was walking. V'shtei todas achrein, and the 2 todas after them. V'chol Yisrael Achreim, and everybody after them. Okay, okay, fine. So, minanimile, how do we know that you need all these things? Because the pasuk says, that the pasuk says that, like everything that I am showing you, I guess the Rebbeinu Shalom says to Moses, everything I'm showing you, I don't know, the plans for the structure of the Mishkan and all of its vessels, v'chein taisu, and so you shall do. V'chein taisu means 4 generations. Says Rashi, first Rashi, and says Vav Mud Aleph, v'chein taisu kra yiseris, it's extra. Lemedrash, to teach, ledoris, for all generations like this. Moshe dehu melech, Moshe was kilu, the king, v'novi, and a prophet, v'ochiv, and his brother Kohen Gadol was the high priest, v'urim v'tumim, and he had the urim v'tumim, v'shivim zakenim, there were 70 elders dartin. So all of that entire mitzias is lidoiris, for all generations. Okay, so therefore, in order to add on to the ir or the azaras, you need all of these things. Now, the pasuk had said, right, is tavnis hamishkan v'tavnis kol kelim v'chein taisu, that also the vessels, everything regarding the vessels, are for all generations. So Mosiv Rave asks a kasha about the vessels. Kol hakelim she'asa Moshe mishichosim mekadashtan, that we have a brisa that says that all of the vessels that I assume it's a brisa that Moses made mishichosim mekadashtan, he would anoint the vessels with shemen hamishcha, with anointing oils. And when he anointed the vessels, they became kadosh kedushas haguf. What does Rashi say? Kedushas haguf l'klei sharis. Yeah. Okay. So they become, the klei sharis are now officially klei sharis. He would anoint them with this special oil, and they became klei sharis, vessels for the Mishkan or the Beis Hamikdash. Or I guess the Mishkan in Moses' example. However, moving forward, post Moses, you would make a vessel a klesharis by using it. And if you need a vessel for Kabbalah Saddam, you'd use it for Kabbalah Saddam, and now it's a klesharis for Kabbalah Saddam. So you avidosim mechan choson. But ve'amai. But Rava says, I don't understand this brisa because I thought the pasuk says v'neim v'chein tais l'doiris. The pasuk says, right, as we just read, I'm reading the pasuk, tavnis mishkan v'tavnis kol kelev v'chein taisu l'doiris. That it's for all generations. Kacha. Let me, yeah. So I don't understand why should there be any difference between how they would make a klisharis during the times of Moses versus other times. I thought everything is the same. So shiny awesome, it's different by klei sharis. How come? Because the pasuk says, "Vayim shochem vaykadesh esom." By Moses, it says that he anointed the vessels, and he was mekadesh osam, them, esam b'mashicha, v'lodeus b'mashicha. The vessels of Moses were anointed, but only the vessels of Moses were anointed. For the subsequent generations, their vessels were not anointed. You made them klei by using them. Ema osam b'mashicha lidairis o b'mashicha o ba'avoda. But maybe what we'll say, right? The bright. All of a sudden, my lips started hurting. I don't know why. Super random. I don't know. Super weird. Let me pause the video for a second and take control of the situation. What do you think the Rabbanu Shalom's telling me? My lip all of a sudden started hurting while I was recording Babylon Talmud. What do you think the Rabbanu Shalom's telling me? I wonder. Chev, what do you think the Rabbanu Shalom's telling me? What do you think the Rabbanu Shalom's telling me? I wonder. Chev, let me know. If you have any ideas, let me know. What's say Sphira? Today is Tiferes Shebenetzach. Ooh, that's nice. Tiferes Shebenetzach. Does any of that have to do with speaking? I was reading the shir from Rav Ginsburg. He said that Sipur, which is to tell us, like Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, has to do with the sphere of Tiferes. Like the Saper has like those two, or Pei Reish, which is also like Pe'er for Tiferes. I'll go upon him. Let's go weiter. So okay, fine. So we have the Brisa. So the Brisa said that the vessels of Moses were with oil, anointing oil, and the vessels of subsequent generations were avodos and mechanchos, and you use them. And how come? Because the Bible says osam, only they were with oil. But affecting Gemara, why does the word osam mean that? Oh, sure, I get it. It means that only Moses's were with the Shemin HaMishcha. But it doesn't tell us about the other generations. Maybe the other generations were either or. Okay, it's different than Moses, but so Moses, you needed to use the Shemin HaMishcha. But maybe for the other generations, it was either or. You could do either one, right? So Ema Osam b'Mashicha, Moses's were a Shemin HaMishcha, L'Dairis, but for other generations, it could be either or. Either Shemin HaMishcha or Avoda. How do you know it means Davka? Avoda. Amar of Pape says a Pape Amakra. The verse says, rub my eyes. Sorry, Mom, you don't get an apology for eyes, only nose. Okay. Amar Pape says a Pape Amakra. The pasuk says, Asher Yesharsu Bam Ba'Kedesh. That the pasuk says that you will use the vessels that is referring to the subsequent generations, that avodason michan choson talona kosov b'sheiris. That the pasuk says that in subsequent generations, avodason michan choson, it's the avoida that you do with them that makes them clay shars. Hasu d'chse d'chasav achmona asher yisharsu osam lamali. Okay, well now that we have a pasuk that says that by other generations it's Yesharsu Bam Bakodesh, I don't really need Osam to limit the Shemin HaMishcha to Moshe Rabbeinu's, right? To Moses's. Kilu, okay, meaning just say, what does it say? Vayim Shochem, right? Vayim Shochem. Yekadasham, I guess, maybe just avoid using the word Osam, I guess. And that would say, okay, so Moses's were anointed. And then we have this other pasuk of Asher Yesharsu Bam Bakodesh to say that in future generations, Avodas Mechan Chosim. Why do we need the word Osam for? Ilai Kasav Achmana Esam, if the pasuk did not say Osam, Hava Amina Hane Hu Dibemshicha, I might think that Moses's were only with Shemin HaMishcha, L'Dairis B'Meshicha Uva Avoda. I might think that for future generations you have to do both Meshicha and Avoda. The Akasav V'chein Taisu, because after all, the pasuk, we did have that initial pasuk of V'chein Taisu, and so shall you do. So, if not for Osam, I would have thought that actually the Shemin HaMishcha does apply to subsequent generations as well, and you would have to do Meshicha in addition to Avodas Mechan Chosan. So therefore, Mi'et Rachmana Osam B'Meshicha V'Lados B'Meshicha. Therefore, the pasuk says Osam to say that only Moses's were Be'meshicha, subsequent generations were not. They were ba'avoda avodosan mechan chosan v'shtei todas. Now we are moving on to the todas. We said that when they would extend the city of Jerusalem, you'd have the king and the prophet and all sorts of things. And one of the things was two todas. A korban toda is a like a korban shlamim kind of thing. The difference is the amount of time that you have to eat it. You have less time to eat it, right? Korban shlamim. Maybe there are other differences. We're going to get to Seder Kodshim soon. We've been learning together for 5 years. We've learned a lot together, almost 2,000 dafs of Gemara. We haven't learned that much Kodshim. It came up a shtickle in Psachim, Shkalim, maybe Yoma. But we didn't learn like that much Kodshim. But soon we're going to learn about, I don't know exactly how long, but probably close to 2 years. Probably a little bit less, maybe a year and a half, year and 3/4 of Kodshim. So I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to learn Kodshim. We haven't done so much Kodshim yet together. So maybe there are other differences as well. Some differences between a Korban Shlamim and a Korban Toda. Korban Shlamim you can eat for 2 days and the night in between. Shnei Yom v'Layla Echad. A Korban Toda is L'Yom v'Layla. Just that day and the following night. Also, with a Korban Toda, and this is going to be important, with a Korban Toda, you bring 40 loaves of bread. Okay? 4 types, 10 loaves each. 3 out of the 4 types were unleavened, were not chametz. 1 of the types, 10 of the 40 breads, were chametz. Okay? Now these are basically some of the only exceptions in the Beis Hamikdash where there was chametz, the 10 lachmei Torah, as well as, I'm recording today, it is the 24th day of the Omer, which means that when you hear this daf, it'll probably be around Lag BaOmer, and which means that we are getting close to Shevuos. And on Shevuos, they would bring, and as we're going to see soon, what's called the Shtei Alechem. Those were 2 loaves of wheat bread. Those were chametz. Other than that, right, right, you don't have leaven in the right, lo se'ofe chametz, etc. So there isn't much chametz in the Beis Hamikdash. Okay. So Korban Todas were basically these like offerings. They were like shlamim type offerings. The reason why I say that is because part of it would go on the mizbeach, part of it would go to the kohanim, the rest would go to the offerer. And it was also brought with these 40 loaves of bread. I think part of the 40 loaves of bread also is maybe like it was so much that you had to like share it with people and givaldig azoy. So says the Gemure, Tana Shtei Todas she'amru, that when they said these 2 todas, bilachman velo bisaron. So we're not talking about, they didn't have like 2, they didn't walk around with 2 like dead animals. Okay? They the Korban Toda, as I said, came with 40 loaves. They would take 2 of those loaves, right? So you have 2 todas, I guess a total of 80 loaves, and you would take 2 of those loaves, okay? Then they would walk around with that. That was part of the procession. So Tana Shtei Todas Sha'amu B'lachma, we're talking about their bread, not the todas themselves, not the animals themselves, not the meat. V'lo b'bsar, not their flesh. How do we know this? Amar of Chizde, it says of Chizde, the Pasuk says in Sefer Nehemiah, V'amida Shtei Todas Gedolis, and it talks about when they added on to Jerusalem, and they had 2 big todas, V'ta'aluchos Layamin Mi'al Lechoma, and they had a procession to the right of the wall, next to the wall. They walked to the right, next to the wall. My Gedolis. What does it mean, big todas? Ilema mimin gadol mamish. If it means, well, it was pashut, a big animal. It was a cow, a big animal. Name a parim. So just say cows. So ela gedolos b'minon. Okay, no, maybe it doesn't mean that it was cows per se. It could have been a sheep. It could have been a goat. Could have been a cow. I think maybe a korban toda could be any of those things. I don't know. But whatever it was, even if it was a sheep, it was a big sheep. But mi'ikach shivusa kamishmaya. What? Is that important? Does it have to be the biggest one you could find? Does the Rabbeinu Shalom value that? We learn in the Mishnah in Menachos. Nemar be'olaz behema ishereach nichoyach. By an animal korban ola, it says it was a reach nichoach. How do you define reach nichoach? A fragrant scent. Be'olaz ha'of ishereach nichoyach. The zel bazach. By if you have a bird, ola, also a pleasant fragrance. B'mincha, even if just merely a flower offering, ishereach nichoach, it's still gishmak, with the shmef is sweet to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Which means that whether you do a lot or you do a little, it's just as good in the eyes of the Rabbeinu Shalom. Uvilvad she'ichavin es liboy. Love of Shabbat Shamayim, so long as the intention is right, as long as a person aligns his heart to his Father in heaven. So therefore, so what value would there be in like the having a really big sheep? The Rabbeinu Shalom Rachmana Liba boy. The Rabbeinu Shalom wants hearts. Elegedola Shabbatoda. What it means is the biggest of the lachmei toida, right? You have those 40 loaves, 4 different types of loaves. We're talking about the biggest of the types of loaves. That's what they would walk around with, and that is the chametz loaves. So they were, I imagine we're talking about 2 todas. Does 2 todas mean, well, I don't even know. Does 2 todas mean like 2 korban todas? So we're talking about 80 loaves and they would take 2 out of 80, or maybe it just means like 2 breads. Maybe that's what it means. Or maybe that's what it means. Maybe just like 2 breads from 1 korban toda. I don't actually know. Maybe it's actually just like 1 korban toda and like 2 breads from 1 korban toda, possibly. I'm not actually sure. Maybe it's machlokas. But anyways, there will be 2 breads. The chametz breads. Those are the biggest breads, as we're going to see in a minute. Right? So they would have 2 breads, 2 chametz breads. They would walk around with that. Umay niu chametz. Those are the chametz loaves. The chametz loaves were bigger than all the other loaves. How do we know that? Ditnan atoda haisa ba'a min chamish sayin Yerushalmi shen sheish midbariyis shehen shtei efes va'efes shalosh sayin eser misayin asar lechametz v'asar lematzah shloshim min chalus v'kikin v'vucha. Woo! Cheveh, who can tell me what this means? This has come up a few times. I was actually thinking recently that, oh wow, this confusing thing hasn't come up in a while. And I was like kind of happy about that. I think it came up a bunch of times, maybe a handful of times or less in like Seder Moed maybe. I think it came up once. Also maybe, I don't remember, maybe like a year or 2 ago, but I didn't need to get into it. But it came up again now. It's probably going to come up in Menachos. The different sa'ah measurements, right? There was a sa'ah midbari, a sa'ah Yerushalmi, a sa'ah tzipori. That there was the desert sa'ah, the Jerusalem sa'ah. I live in Jerusalem. And the tzipori sa'ah. The Jerusalem, so the smallest one was the desert sa'ah. The middle one was the Jerusalem sa'ah. And the largest one was the tzipori sa'ah. The Jerusalem sa'ah was 20% larger than the desert sa'ah, and the tzipori sa'ah was 20% larger than the Jerusalem one. So let's just say for argument's sake, to put it into more relatable terms. So let's say a desert sa'ah, one desert sa'ah, let's say was 50 grams. I'm just going to make it up. 50 grams, it's easy to work with the number 50. And the Jerusalem sa'ah was 20% larger than that, so 60 sa'ahs. And the tzipori sa'ah was 10% larger than the Jerusalem one, which is 20% larger than the Jerusalem one, which is 72 sa'ahs. Okay, fine. So what we're saying here you don't really need to understand. I mean, if you want to understand the Gemara, you have to understand this. But like, you can also just like, if you're satisfied by just saying like chametz was the biggest one, that's fine. But anyways, the way that we learn it out is the following: that the so that the amount of the the amount of like flour in the lachmei toda for a korban toda was 5 Jerusalem sa'as. So if we use my random numbers, about each sa'a is so each Jerusalem sa'a is 60 grams, right? Each desert sa'a is 50 grams. Each Jerusalem sa'a is 60 grams. So if we're talking about 5 of those, 60 times 5 is 300 grams. And we're saying that that's the equivalent of 6 desert sa'as, because if we're saying that a desert sa'a is 50 grams, then 6 of those is also 300 grams. Now, 6 desert sa'as is the equivalent of 2 ephahs, because 2 ephahs is, because each ephah is 3 desert sa'as, and that is the equivalent of 20 isaruns. Okay. Now, of those 20 isaruns, we're almost done. Of those 20 isaruns, 10 of them, half of them, were earmarked for the 10 chametz breads, and the remaining 10 isaruns were earmarked for all of the 30 outstanding matzah loaves. So basically we see that each chametz loaf had 3 times the amount of flour as did each matzah loaf. Okay, whatever. If you followed, great. If not, not. But let's read it inside. So, the chametz. The Tanan is learned in a Mishnah in Menachos. Hatoda Isa ba min chamesh sayin Yerushalmius, that the korban mincha was the korban toda was, I guess the breads of the korban toda were a total of 5 Jerusalem sa'as. And again, if we're saying that a Jerusalem sa'a was 60 grams, that's 300 grams. Shein sheish midbarios, which is equivalent of 6 midbari sa'as, which again, if we're saying if a desert sa'a was 50 grams, then 50 times 6 is also 300, so those are equivalent. Shein shtei ephahs, that 6 midbari sa'as are the equivalent of 2 ephahs, ve'ephah shalosh sa'in, because an ephah is 3 sa'as each. And that is esum isarun, equivalent to 20 isaruns. Asar l'chametz, 10 of those 20 isaruns were earmarked for the 10 chametz loaves, while Va'asara, the remaining 10 were earmarked lematzah for the remaining 30 matzah loaves. Uvematzah shloisha mine chalis, and by matzah there were 3 types of loaves. Shlosha minin, 3 types. There were chalos, rikikin, and revucha. And even though there were 3 times the amount of matzah loaves as there were chametz loaves, they still had, right, the chametz had the same amount of flour as all 3 matzah types combined. Therefore, we see that the chametz ones were the largest ones, and they would walk around with 2 of those chametz loaves. Rami bar Chome, says Rami bar Chome, Eino azara miskadeshes ela b'shiyarei minche. Says Rami bar Chome, while the expansion of Jerusalem, as we said, you would have a korban toda, but for the expansion of the Azorah inside the Beis Hamikdash, that would not have a korban toda, that would have shiyarei mincha. With that, you would have, right, the Kohanim, there would be a korban mincha, and the Kohanim would take a fistful of it, and put it on the Mizbeach, and the rest, what's left over for them, that is what would be part of the procession when extending the Azorah. My time, how come? Ki Yerushalayim. Well, we're going to sort of equate the extension of the Azorah with the extension of Jerusalem. My Yerushalayim, Dover Anechol Ba Mikadsha. Af Azar Dover Anechol Ba Mikadsha. Just like when extending Jerusalem, you extend it with a korban. You include in the procession a korban that is eaten in Jerusalem. Korban Toda is Kachuv Kalim. It's eaten in the entire city of Jerusalem. And therefore, when we are extending the Azara, we also are going to use, include a korban that is eaten in the Azara, like a korban mincha. Otu lachme toda ba'azar milo misachle. But wait, what's the problem with using a korban toda to extend the azara? After all, you could certainly eat a korban toda in the azara. You can eat it anywhere in Jerusalem, but you can also eat it in the azara. So what's the problem with using a korban toda for extending the azara as well? Ela b'Yushalayim, ki Yerushalayim. Rather, this is the comparison that we make to Jerusalem. Ma Yerushalayim davar anechol ba v'yotze mimeno nifsol. Af azore davar anechol ba v'yotze mimeno nifsol. The comparison is that just like when extending Jerusalem, we use a korban that is eaten in Jerusalem, and if it leaves Jerusalem, it becomes pasul, right? Korban toda is kachim kalim. It can be eaten anywhere in Jerusalem. If you take it out of Jerusalem, it is pasul b'yotze. When it leaves, it's pasul. And therefore, we want to find the same when extending the azara, i.e. we want to use a korban that is eaten in the azara, and if it leaves the azara, it becomes pasul, i.e. kodshe kodshim, and therefore we're using shiyare mincha, because by a korban toda, of course it can leave the azara, as it can go anywhere in Jerusalem. Can you even eat it in nachlaot? A korban toda, that can be nice. Maybe. Akoponim. Well, maybe as long as they just maybe officially extend the walls of Jerusalem to include nachlaot, we'll get the king and the prophet. Maybe the king and the prophet will be out in the park. That could be nice. That could be nice. But I'll suggest that just like by the korban toda, we said that we're using 2 chametz loaves, so then maybe also by the azara, we would need chametz, not just flour. But if we're saying that when we extend the Yerushalayim, so we use chametz, so let's also use chametz in the azara. Why are we using just leftover flour? But is there such a thing as a chametz flour offering? Right? I think the only chametz is in the Beis HaMikdash. As I said earlier, maybe I'm forgetting something, but there's the 10 loaves by a toda, and there's the shtei alechem on Shevuos. Otherwise, there's no chametz. Well, maybe what you do is you make the leftover. What you do is you take flour and you scoop out a fistful. You put that on the mizbeach. Then what's left over, maybe you add a stick of water, maybe a stick of salts. You make epis a pita or a lafa or whatever bread you like. Maybe taka you do make it chametz, and then you use that. So maybe you make the leftovers chametz v'aksiv lo say ofe chametz chelkom v'omer yesh lakish afilu chelkom lo say ofe chametz. No, the pasuk says that lo say ofe chametz chelkom, meaning even chelkom, even any part of the korban mincha, even the shirayim cannot be made into chametz. Wow, for some reason my brain is like, I wouldn't say it's mushy. This isn't such a mushy concept, but I don't know. This daf is an interesting daf. It's not a particularly difficult daf, but it's like, I don't know. I'm like, it's using a lot of energy, and then when I use a lot of energy, I use a lot of brains. And when I use a lot of brains, then also my brains are just like, I'm tired. All right, what can I tell you? Alam Allah, but still the Gemara pushes weiter. Still, why can't we use chametz when we're extending the azara? Alam Allah yafshir. Why? Efshir the mekadosh b'shtei alechem ba'atzeres. Shevuos is coming up, right? Be'ez Hashem, Mashiach is coming before Shevuos, and we're going to have the shtei alechem in the Beis HaMikdash, and what? And the shtei alechem is chametz. So why don't you just use the shtei alechem when extending the azorah? Mishum d'lo efshir. Because it's impossible. Hey Chinavid, how are you going to use the shtei alechem in the ceremony for extending the azar? Nivnaye me esmol v'nikadshe me esmol shtei alechem b'shchitas kvosim udikadshe. If you're going to say, well, how about this? Let us finish the building, the extension of the Azara on Erev Shevuos, and we'll offer the Shtei Alechem on Erev Shevuos, and we'll use it in this ceremony on Erev Shevuos for extending the Azara. But the problem is, right, as I just read, Shtei Alechem b'shchitas kvasim udikacha. The Shtei Alechem only becomes kadosh when the sheep are slaughtered as korbanos on Shevuos. So you can't just offer the Shtei Alechem on Erev Shevuos, you have to offer them on Shevuos. Maybe let's finish building the extension on Erev Shevuos, and we'll make the ceremony with the Shtei Alechem that are chametz on Shevuos. That won't work because we need the ceremony and the kiddush to be at the time of when you finish the building, not the next day. How about this? Let's just finish the construction on Yom Tiv, and then we'll have the ceremony on Yom Tiv with the Shtei Alechem. And Binyan Mikdash doche Yom Tiv. You can't build the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Tiv. It does not override Shabbos, nor does it override Yom Tiv, building the Beis HaMikdash. So you can't do that either. Nishavke lebaser hachi v'nivnaye v'nikadshe. Well, how about this? On Shavuos, we'll have the Shtei Alechem, great, and we won't eat them on Shavuos. We'll leave them over until the day after Shavuos. We'll finish then doing the construction on Isru Chag the day after Shavuos, and we will then have the ceremony with the Shtei Alechem from Shevuos, from the day before. The problem is, if you leave it overnight without eating it, it becomes pasul belina. Becomes pasul belina, right? Overnight it becomes pasul. You can't just leave it till the next day. Nivnai mimayle yome yoma v'nishayir be purta. So how about this? Let's build the extension of the Azara and basically almost complete the extension on Erev Shevuos. We'll just leave a tiny bit that we could do Motzai Shevuos. So basically on Shevuos we'll bring the Shtei Alechem, 2 loaves of bread that are chametz. We'll do that on Shevuos, and we have to eat them until midnight. So then once Shevuos is over at Tzeis HaKochavim, we then have a window of time where we could finish doing the construction and then have a ceremony with the Shtei Alechem from that day that is not yet possible. The Ad Kodesh Yoma, where am I? Yoma, V'neshayir Bei Purta, the Ad Kodesh Yoma, Le'alter Nigmere V'nikache, right? And then immediately after Shavuos is over, we'll just quickly finish the building, the construction, and have the ceremony with the Shtei Alechem. Ein binyan Beis HaMikdash balayla. Well, you can't build the Beis HaMikdash at night. Tamar Abaye says, Minayin she'ein bon in Beis HaMikdash balayla. How do you know that we don't build the Beis HaMikdash at night? Shenemar, as Paul says, Uvayom Hokim Es HaMishkan. Bayom Makimo balayla. In Makimo Ilkoch Lo Efshir. That it says Bayom Akim Es HaMishkan. That we build the Mishkan during the day, not at night. So therefore, we exhausted all of our options. It would be impossible to incorporate the Shtei Alechem into the ceremony for extending the Azara, and therefore, what we use instead are the Shiyarei HaMincha. Okay. Gewaldig. Uvashir. Okay. A song. A niggin. One of the rabbis saw it. Shir Shel Toda. What's the song? Mizmor L'Soida. Hariu L'Hashem Kol Aretz. They would sing in the song. Ivdu Es Hashem B'Simcha Ivdu, and everybody would sing Tzazamen, and it says that there was Bechinoiris, Uvinavalim, Uvetzlatzolim, and there were harps and lyres and they would go cymbals. My neighbor would not be happy. And it says, what does it say? It says, Akol Pino Upina, on every single street corner, Valkol Evan Gadol, on every big stone. We got a big stone outside of Yerushalayim in Jerusalem. Right? They would go, there would be all the cymbals and the harps and the lyres. My neighbor would have a fit. Forget about even the symbols. The liars. With the second that first no comes out of the liar, she would not be happy. And it says, and then we read the Apostle Perak Lamed of Sefer Tilim, right? Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis. Mimcha Hashem K'dilisani v'goymer v'shir shal pegoyim v'yisham shir shal negoyim. Right, the parak capital of Yoshev b'Seisei Elyon. Some call it the shir shal pegoyim, and some call it the shir shal negoyim. And the shir de negoyim. Tichsev v'nega lo yikav ba'alecho. The one who says it's called the shir shal negoyim is because it says v'nega lo yikav ba'alecho. And the shir pegoyim. And the one who says Pegoyim, Dichsev Yipo Mitzircha Elef, it's talking about the Mazikin and Shadim. It says that they will fall from 1,000 of them from your side. Okay. Ve'omer Yoshev b'Seisei Elyon Mitzel Shaka Islonan Ad Ki Ato Hashem Machzi Elyon Tzamtem Onecho. Okay, so you read Yoshev b'Seisei until that point. V'chozav Omer Mizmor LeDavid Bevarchum Pnei Avshalom Beno Hashem Arabu Tzarei Ad Hashem. And you also read that capital Tilim. That is the capital Tilim of, drum roll please, with symbols, Tilim Gimel. Perek Gimel. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Amelu lahani kroi v'goni. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would say Yoshev b'Seisei Elyon right before he went to sleep. It's taka, if you open up the siddur, it's part of Kriya Shema Alamito. Yoshev b'Seisei Elyon. How can you do this? Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, also this rapos b'divrei Torah. You can't use Torah as a way to heal yourself. But lahagin shani, sure, maybe not to heal yourself, but to protect oneself before they go to bed, it is permissible. Velik Yamar Osir Dika Maka. Okay, so then we're saying that according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, when is it osir to use divrei Torah in that capacity? If you have a wound. If you have a wound, you can't use divrei Torah to heal yourself. Yidika make also v'sulo. But if he has a wound, then it's just osir, and that's it. It's much worse than that. V'atnan, we learned in Sanhedrin, haloichesh ala make eno chelek lo'elam haba. Somebody who incants about on a wound, and he says, right, you don't have a portion in the world to come. Well, yeah, but Rabbi Yochanan had said that was specifically if you had spit on the wound first. That was only if you spit on the wound first. So the Mishnah had said that Bezdin would walk and the two Todas were behind them, and maybe the Bezdin Kame Toda Azle. Does that mean that Bezdin was before the Todas? I thought that they worked. It says in the passage that they walked after the Todas. Bezdin Mahalchin v'shtei Todas Malchus. Well, Bezdin would walk, the two Todas would walk. Uvezdin Achareim, but the Bezdin was behind the Todas. Ketzad Mahalchus. How do these Todas walk? Right, you have two Kohanim. One of them is holding a loaf of bread. The other one's holding another loaf of bread. Are they walking side by side next to each other? They're walking one behind the other. So Reb Chia Reb Sherman be Rebbe, Machloikes Reb Chia Reb Sherman be Rebbe, Chad Omar Zoi Keneged Zoi, V'chad Omar Zoi Achar Zoi. Right, one opinion is that they were parallel, they were next to each other. The other one is that they were, in front, behind, right, one in front of the other / behind the other. Manda Omar Zoi Keneged Zoi. So the one who says that they were next to each other, so side by side. So apnimis. So what's considered the inner loaf? The one that is closer to the wall. So you'd have the wall, then the inner loaf, and then the outer loaf, because they were next to each other. The one who says one after the other. Hapnimis hach de mekarva the bezdin. So the inner loaf would be the one that was closer to bezdin, and then on the other side of it would be the other loaf. Tanan apnimis necheles vachitzona nisrefes. Well, we had said in our Mishnah that the inner loaf is the one that is eaten, and the outer loaf is burned. Bishlam l'man omer zo achar zo. So I understand if you say zo achar zo. So amtu lahachi Pnimis necheles. I understand why the inner one is eaten. Mishum da'aseh chitzona kama v'kid shala. Because the first one is the one that was mekadesh. It's kind of technical, but if you imagine that they're in Jerusalem right now, they just extended Jerusalem, and they have this korban toda, and with the korban toda are these 2 loaves of bread, and they're walking the 2 kohanim, they're walking one behind the other. So once they get up to this extension, which up until this very point has not yet been officially made part of Jerusalem, and if it's not officially been made part of Jerusalem, you can't eat a korban toda in that part until it's been officially made part of Jerusalem. Well, what happens is the first kohen goes in there with his toda, with his bread of toda. At that point, it has not yet been incorporated, but when the kohen walks in there, at that point it becomes incorporated. So he kind of like in the process, he loses his bread because when he walks in, it hasn't yet been incorporated. So he's kind of outside of the limits, but by walking in, he incorporates it, but you kind of lose that loaf. But then you can eat the second. That's why we eat the second, the inner loaf, but you have to burn the outer loaf. That makes sense if kind of they're one behind the other, and therefore one is going to walk in. They're going to kind of walk in single file, and therefore the first one kind of walks in when it's not yet kadosh, but by the time the second loaf is walking in, it's already kadosh, and that's why you can eat it. But if you say that they walk side by side, well then why can you eat the inner one? They're both basically arriving into the extension at the same exact time, and it has not yet been made kadosh. For the time, yeah, but still, it's not such a great argument, because even if you say that they're in single file, chara mi mikadja akol shaloi naises b'chol elu tanan. But then again, even if you say they're in single file, it's not much better, because when the first guy walks into the extension, that isn't going to be mekadesh. You need both breads in order to be mekadesh. So like, even if you say they're in single file, the whole logic was that, well, the first guy, when he walks in, he loses the bread, but he's mekadesh the extension. No, but he's not mekadesh extension until the second bread comes in, and both, because you need both of the breads. It says shtei todas. And as we're going to see, I guess tomorrow, that there's an opinion that ba'achas mikol elu, that you don't actually need all of these things, the king and the prophet and whatever, even just one of them is enough, but still, the 2 todas are a unit. Right? They're one unit. So even if you're just going to have the todas, you need both todas. That's like, otherwise it's incomplete. So, look, this is all prophetic kind of stuff. Says Rashi, don't try to explain this logically, like, oh yeah, he's going in first with the loaf, no, it was all prophetic. And they did it based on prophecy with the korban toda, whether it should be side by side or single file, and which one is eaten, which one's burned. It's all like prophetic kind of stuff. Chevra, that was Daf Tes Vav of Masechta Shevuos. We learned about some technical stuff, making vessels and extending the city and the azaras of Jerusalem, and what is needed for that. We also talked about klei sharis a bit. As well as how to extend the Azara, how to extend the Jerusalem, the city, and what is necessary. Peace out.